Well, here we are again. Messy thoughts on Psalm 23. So, we're up to the still waters. So, in leading his flock onwards in search of fresh pasture, still waters, the shepherd apparently must choose to follow a path which to the sheep sometimes seems dark and difficult, the way to better grass. And it often involves going up steep and treacherous ravines and valleys until eventually these new pastures are reached. And in these times the sheep may feel afraid, vulnerable, but the shepherd is with them, and that stops the panic until the sheep are safe. And in a way, the first principle of discipleship is that the sheep follow wherever the shepherd leads them. They have to follow. They absolutely have no alternative. The second thing to remember is that sometimes the shepherd may choose to lead his flock into difficult and challenging places. In fact, the valley of the shadow of death, or sometimes called the valley of deepest darkness, and this is the part of the psalm that people turn to in times of bereavement for comfort and reassurance, as they identify with an experience that is common to all people at all times, the experience of suffering and grief. But I think the valley experience isn't just about that. It's the times when we feel lonely, we feel afraid, when we feel vulnerable. It means those times in life when we feel baffled, perplexed, bruised, battered, when we don't know what to believe anymore. And the valley challenges our faith in God and his goodness. And sometimes, somewhere in our mind, and I've thought this too, sometimes we think that evil, badness, might win, might triumph. And it's at this time in our life that we're called to trust God, to believe that he is the good shepherd, that he knows what he's doing. Someone once said that trust is faith in a dark place. Another phrase, fear no evil. And any experience that we have when we're in these dark times, when we're in these times we don't understand, raises questions in our minds. Sometimes when we have pain and heartache, we question our faith. Does God love me? Does he really care? About, I don't know how many years ago, 15 years ago, 14 years ago, I went in hospital to have a relatively easy operation. And I was in early because I was a diabetic, and they came and drew crosses on me and said, you'll be down for 40 minutes, you're just having your gallbladder out. And in the next bed there was this woman, and she was very friendly, and she said, I'm a witch. I said, oh, that's nice, you know what I'm saying? I said, oh my gosh. She said, yeah, all my coven are going up Billings Hill, praying, up wherever, dancing, whatever they do for me. And I said, all right. I said, oh, well, I go to a church and they'll all be praying for me. Anyway, the witch came back after 40 minutes, and Jeanette was in theatre for 9 hours. And in hospital a week, and then out for a day and back in for another week, and off work 6 months. I'll show you the scar. And I thought, why is this woman who's a witch telling me? You know, and I never really annoyed me for ages after. And that, you know, I know in the big scheme of things it wasn't important, but for them 6 months it was. And it's interesting that when describing the valley, when describing the dark parts of his life, David hints at the presence of evil. He doesn't mention it when he's in by the quiet streams. He mentions it when he's in the valley. he says he doesn't fear evil. Well, I do. I'm sorry, I do. And David suffered at the hands of evil men and was fully aware of the presence of evil forces. And one of the greatest questions that has faced the church and us as Christians through history is this: if God loves us, why does a God of love, why is there so much suffering in the world? Why do bad things happen to good people? Why does God let famines, floods, wars? Somebody said to me the other week, we had a new Prime Minister, I can't remember, we've had that many. They said, all you Christians, did you pray for a Hindu Prime Minister? I said, no, but it's great, isn't it? What do you say? I didn't, it's just people watch and always have something to say. Why does suffering seem so unjust and pointless? And these are real dilemmas that have taxed the mind of theologians and Christians for centuries. And they become more immediate and real when it's our own lives. And I'm as baffled as anyone else. I don't have any final answers, and I don't think anybody has. But there's a few pointers. What I've learned is that there's only a problem because God is a God of love. If he wasn't a God of love, there wouldn't be a problem. The question is, how can those of us who believe in a God of love make sense of it all? Can we really trust the shepherd? Do we trust the shepherd? We have to recognise that we live in a fallen world among fallen people, and as Christians we're not immune to pain and hurt this world throws at us. Our faith is never a divine guarantee that nothing unpleasant will ever happen to us. Our faith isn't a heavenly insurance policy against disaster. Authentic, real Christianity recognises that suffering is part of our walk. The famous verse in Romans 8:28 and 29 tells us, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him and have been called according to his purpose. And the reason we're all able to keep on trusting God despite what happens to us is that the truth provides a framework for our understanding. Sometimes adversity struggles can produce something good in us. Not all tension is bad. St. Paul said this. He said, we rejoice in our sufferings. Imagine doing that. I don't. Selwyn Jones used to say this: we can become bitter or better. And very often in my walk, I'm bitter. 2 Corinthians 4:17 tells us this: for our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen, since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. Can we? Do we trust the shepherd? Especially when we can't understand everything. It'd be nice sometimes to have explanations, ready-made solutions for every problem. Sometimes we want to put God in a box and predict his every move. Thank God we can't. Thank God we can't, because he is God and he is never confined by our human understanding. He's too great for that. He is wisdom beyond comprehension. His paths we can't understand. He doesn't need advice from us. Some people pray as if they're telling him what he should be doing. We have to learn to live with mystery. We have to learn to say to people, do you know, I don't know. I just don't know the answer to that. We have to learn to be humble enough to leave some of our questions unanswered and to love him just the same. We have to learn to trust and obey. We need to believe that the Good Shepherd really is good, even if we don't understand all his ways, and even if sometimes life is unbearably painful. We have to take him at his word. We don't like it when people don't take us at our word. And I'm sure God is the same. John 14:1 tells us, trust in God, trust also in me. And just think for a moment, what ways, what times in our lives has God guided you? We're honest, it's the times in our life when we've thought God is too small. How does God guide us? How does God speak to us? Does God speak to us? Is it in our imagination? I've said before, I always struggle with God speaking to you because I used to give injections to people who said that God had told them something. Yet Christians can get away with saying it. They do a lot of this prophecy stuff at CLC, and they always seem nice prophecies, you know. There's never any, like, not so nice ones. And when you read the Bible, they're not all nice, are they? So that's a bit about guiding. Prepare a table. Although most commentators say that there's a change in the psalm in verse 5. You prepare a table before me. So we've left the shepherd imagery and it's replaced by that of a gracious host who is a friend and welcomes us to his banqueting table. The scene moves from countryside, streams and valleys to a splendid surroundings of a palace, and the danger and apprehension of the valley where there's evil knocking about, gives way to this celebration. It doesn't seem to have much to do with sheep. But we have to remember that David was both a shepherd and a king. And Jesus, of course, fits with both descriptions. The old hymn, the King of Love, my shepherd is, whose goodness faileth never. To sit at the King's table is a privilege. Indeed, it's an honour. And I don't think I'm aware of what it really means. We become complacent in our lives and in our churches, in Christian lives. We have tea on our knees, don't we? Fast food. I ring up 25018. She answers the phone. She says, same road? I say, yeah. No green pepper? I say, yeah. Not even spoke to her. She said, 10 minutes. And she always says, and it always makes me laugh, I've only done it about 4 times, she says, no calendar February. I say, no. Because when you try and give you them calendars at, Feb, whenever the new year is, I always say, no. So when she rings up, she says, no green pepper, no calendar. And I've never even said my name. So, you know, you go to McDonald's and you have exactly the same. You can sit in a funny little place in Turkey or Egypt and it tastes exactly the same as sitting in Church Street McDonald's. It's funny, isn't it, that, really? But this talks of splendour, doesn't it? No green peppers, but splendour. To sit at the table, that's what grace is all about. God has invited us to share in the riches of his provision, even though we're weak, fearful, and we don't understand his mercy. Even though we do things wrong again and again and again, we still get a place at his table. I've learnt the more we understand grace, the more we realise how wonderful it is. About, 12 years ago, I started going abroad. I used to go to Suffolk every year. It took 6.5 hours. And I realised I could go to Egypt in 6, so I jibbed Suffolk off. And we started going abroad. And every time I went abroad, Jim Boardman, who some of you remember, he used to give me an envelope. And he said, Jeanette, if you need anything, you've got this card. And I never opened it, the envelope, about 10 times I must have used it. Never took it with me. I was always scared. I always zipped it in my case, thinking I was going to lose it. And every time I'd go back and say, Jim, here's your card. I've not used it. And he'd smile. The last time he was alive, I gave him his card back. I said, Jim, here's your card. I've not used it. And he said, have you had a look at that? Have you ever looked at the card? I said, no, I never opened the envelope. I'm too scared. And he said, open it. And when I opened it, it had my name on. And he told me how much was on that card. Might have used it, I think. A heck of a lot of money. And it was there. It was a provision. If ever I needed it, it was there. Whenever I go away now, I always think, gosh, I wish I had that in my bag. And that's grace, isn't it? It's a well. It's a well that's always there. It's always there. It's a safety for us. It's safety, safety, safety. And I'll always remember and be grateful to Jim for that. And the table spread before us represents all the benefits of the finished work of Jesus, his death and resurrection. In many ways, it's a repeat of verse 1, I shall not want. Our God has provided everything we need. And when we start our Christian life, we start in grace. And very often I've realised we try and carry on a bit in our own strength. It's like a bit of a subtle transfer from grace to works. What is it that God has spread before us? What does the banquet consist of? Set before us of all the benefits that flow from Jesus' atoning death on the cross and his victorious resurrection. In other words, everything that is associated with our salvation and is needed to live our Christian life on a daily basis. Our dependency on God has to become an essential part of living the life that he has for us. John 15 verse 5 says, I am the vine, you are the branches. We have to be more aware that we can't do anything without him. We have to thank God no matter how many times we come to God and draw on his resources. There is always enough. We can come again and again because he delights in giving and giving everything we need. John 1 verse 16 says, out of his fullness we have all received grace in place of grace already given. How easy it is for us all to fail to realise that God has already provided all that we need in Jesus. The King of Love invites us to his table. No enemies. Nothing can stop us from enjoying everything that God has provided for us. The table has been laid in the presence of my enemies. David had many enemies. We can read about them through the Bible during his life. Some deserved, some probably not, some jealous of the role that he had. There was a bounty on his head, we're told. I don't think any of us have that today. Lee might in the Bull and Dog, but, I don't think anybody else. But as Christians, we can take our place at God's banqueting table without any fear. Romans 8, verse 31 tells us, if God is for us, who can be against us? Do we remind ourselves of that truth enough? Do you and I need strength today? Do we need wisdom? Do we need forgiveness? Do we need joy? It's set before us. It's all there. It's on the table. It's there for each one of us. But we have to receive by faith everything we need, and more is already ours. God our Father is our host. He's anticipated our needs and has made full arrangements. Menus are different now. They're all gluten-free and lactose and vegetarians. There's all lots of... And God knows our individual needs. He knows what's good for us. He knows what we need. So let us all take what has been provided for us. It was a price, it cost, but it's life-giving and life-sustaining. Amen.